We breathe in the silence. We hold the silence within us.
If there's a picture of me at the very tight, the video is off.
We breathe out, we share that silence with one another. We breathe in peace. We hold that peace within us. We breathe out, we share that peace with one another. We breathe in the present moment. We hold this present moment within us. We breathe out, we smile. We breathe in attentiveness. We hold this attention within us. We breathe out an attentiveness to the world. We breathe in love. We dwell in that love within us. We breathe out that love for the world. We breathe in compassion. We hold God's compassion within us. We breathe out that compassion for the world. We breathe in wonder. We hold that wonder of creation within us. We breathe out that wonder into the world. We breathe in this present moment together across the land. We hold this present moment within us. We breathe out, we know it is a good moment. Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me once again in St. Martin in the Fields in Trafalgar Square, and for this privilege of sharing silence with you, the silence where all our faiths meet, the silence where love and mercy and compassion and the desire for a greater justice in our world meet as we meet together. Over the years, it's been wonderful to have you present in this building and to fill this building with your silent prayer. Today, it's also special because it's the idea of the light diffusing, and each one of those boxes that we see on the screen, each one of those squares, I think when I looked, there's 197 people who have joined part of this day. Each of those 197 rectangles is a home and a life and a place infused this morning with silence and with prayer and with a longing for a just creation and a greater attentiveness to the wonder of the world. Let's just spend a moment, as Jill has said, giving thanks for this online community, praying for the life of each person gathered. Elizabeth, Leslie, Jill, Margaret, Willie, Mary, Harriet, Samuel, Gillian, Caroline, Margaret, Maria, June, Douglas, Primrose, Terry, Eleanor, Ursula, Linda, Stella, Elizabeth, Mary, Carol, Bill, Jack, Arthur, Nikki, Kristana, Maria, Jan, Victoria, Rosemary, Daphne, Yvonne and Richard, Hilary, Brian, Linda, Jim, Derry, Jenny, Mary, Douglas, Marita, Lynn, Susan, Mary, Beryl, Sue, Julie, Annette, John, Linda, Maeve, Christine, Diana, Janet, Peter, Kathy, John, Mick, Elizabeth, Lynn, Alicia, Diana, Lecca, Carol, Colin, Kelvin, Patricia, Maria, Belinda, Anna, Margaret, Peter, Lynette, Mary, Lerone, Richard, Jacqueline, Ken, Beatrice, Susan, Anne, Linda, Chris, Rajesh, Hugh, Valerie, Margaret, Joanna, Sarah, Madonna, Chris, Antonio, Valerie, Christine, Brenda, Anne, Susan, Michael, Bella, Ian, Cheryl, Drew, Jane, Paul, John, Janine, Penelope, Angela, Valerie, Lynn, Eileen, Jethrin, Elaine, Virginia, Serena, Sue, Gabby, Mike, Diana, Fiona, Lola, Dorothy, Dominique, Janice, Carol, Maggie, Lena, Deirdre, Anne, David, Sally, Gwyn, Nikki, Penny, Jean, Gillian, Mary, Pauline, Freidgard, Linda, Brian and Tracy, Samantha, Stephen, Michael, Diana, Paul, Juliet, Jilly, Susan, Carol, Nicola, Sophie, Mickey, Mulgar Ratsata, Maureen, Graham, Jurgis, Rakesh, Angela, Barbara, Rebecca, Toots, Barbara, Gillian, Gwyneth, Virginia, Robert, Jennifer, Margaret, Catherine, Miranda, Sue, Chloe, Kate, Francis, Jill, Josephine, Liz, Tony, Julie, Sheila, Pamela, Sarah, Angela, Hope, Alan, Robin, Sophie, Gillian, Gwyneth, Robert, Jennifer, Margaret, Catherine, Miranda, Sue, Chloe, Aita, Francis, Jill, Josephine, Liz, Tony, Julie, Sheila, Pamela, Sarah, Angela, Alan, Robin, Sophie, and Joan. Wow, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of homes. That's a lot of people who today are bearing the presence of silence, the presence of attentiveness. And if I didn't mention your name, that's only because it didn't come up on my screen, so forgive me. But I wonder if today each one of us can be the bearer, the carriers of a deeper attentiveness, a deeper peace, a deeper silence. That we can not only replenish our own souls, but we can be like the spring of living water that shares that water and that refreshment with those we meet. Because true contemplation is not just something that keeps us happy by ourselves. True contemplation is something that, like this morning, links us with one another and across the world. And what a feast we've had this morning already. How very, very special today to hear Leslie O'Connor helping us to look with the eyes of our hearts. And how wonderful to listen with the ear of our souls as Rajesh took us through those sounds of Om. Thank you to both of you. I want to talk to you today a strange title called The Upward Gravity of Love. I wish I'd invented those words, but I haven't. They're the words which come from Meister Eckhart. And if you've joined me on my meditations on Saturday morning, as I know Leslie was talking about, it's a writer that I often come back to because he seems to use phrases that sort of you can carry with you. They're like kaons. They open up within you the more you think about them. And I'd like to read you what he says about the upward gravity of love. You are the one who falls so that you can find me in the deep and downward tumble of life, like a stone that descends intending ever down to where it comes to rest. And just so, there where I fall is where you wait and how you call. Oh, fall with me all the long way down, and so reach me through the call that rises impossibly as the upward gravity of love. That rises impossibly as the upward gravity of love. Maybe from those words of Meister Eckhart, you recognize the echo which we find in that Falling Upwards by Richard Rohr, that sense of falling down and yet discovering the upward gravity of love. I think this last 9 months since March has been a time of falling, of loss, of stripping back, of finding ourselves completely in a foreign land, because none of us are used to being quite so isolated or cut off, although some of us have more experience of that than others. But of learning to live in a different way. And in this uncertainty, in this fall, in this fear of the unknown and fear of a virus which has affected the lives of so many people and taken away the lives of so many people. In this falling, perhaps we have also discovered a holding. The sense that we are met somehow, and that our contemplative prayer has helped us somehow to discover in that falling the upward gravity of love, the things that are really important, the things that sustain us and hold us. Julian of Norwich, facing similar or perhaps even worse struggles than we were facing, 100 Years' War and the Black Death, she discovered 3 great things in her cell, which she talks about. 1, God made us. 2, God loves us. 3, God nourishes and sustains us. There you have it, the upward gravity of love. That we are created and part of something much, much greater. That we are loved. and that we are sustained by that love and by a God of love. Created, loved, sustained. In this time of uncertainty, perhaps we have learnt some of the great simple truths of spiritual teachers of the past. Some of those spiritual teachers lived in the desert and are called the desert fathers and mothers, and many of you may be familiar with them. But one of the famous sayings of the desert fathers, when a young novice comes and asks him what he must do to seek eternal life or to become a better monk, a bit like that young man comes to Jesus, the spiritual teacher tells him that return to your cell and your cell will teach you everything. Return to your cell and your cell will teach you everything. And I suppose in an enforced way, that's what's happened to many of us in the last 9 months. We've had to return to a simpler way of living. Return to our homes if we have them, or return to our rooms, or return to our bubbles, and to try and find there the source of our life, of our love, and of all the things that nurture us and nourish us. And I would want to suggest to you that perhaps that's not always been a loss, or perhaps in the loss there has also been a discovery. I know in the Nazareth community, which I'm privileged to be part of and to help lead, that people have spoken about a greater attentiveness. The way, as we have entered into this time together, although separate together, colours have seemed brighter. It's almost like the spectacles that I wear have been cleansed so that I've seen the world, or others have talked about seeing the world in perhaps a clearer way, and of really recognizing the things that they treasure and the things that they want to hold on to. Rediscovering the need for space, for silence in our lives, and the realization that it's not that we are at home and God is in the faraway place, but that God is our home, and that often we live in the faraway place and need to come home. I write in my book, The City is My Monastery, we are always moving, so we don't always see. Always talking, so we don't always hear, or we hear in snatches or in bites. But we're not able to listen to the heights or depths. We hear the notes and the discords, but not the music of the silence. You actually have to stop to see, to be still to notice. Have you ever found yourself needing to do so many things at once that you end up doing nothing? Have you ever tried to eat everything so quickly that you've ended up tasting nothing? Have you ever walked through rather than staying with? Walked past rather than offering space and time? Rushed to take the photo rather than realizing that the true camera is our inner eye? We think we have to catch up with the world. Actually, we have to be still enough to let the world catch up with us, and to meet the world in the still place. Thomas Merton in Seeds of Contemplation writes that contemplation is not a painkiller. It will involve us facing the struggles of our time. It's not like we become contemplatives and all is peace and light. One of the first things that we began to notice in lockdown is that we're not only more attentive to the world around us, but we also become more attentive to our fears, our worries, our uncertainty about the future, more attentive to our mortality, perhaps. Have you ever thought when someone comes close to you, that could be the closeness that could pass on an infection? Have you ever worried walking into a supermarket or when someone wants to greet you with affection? Have you ever walked onto a bus or onto an underground train and worried that it was too crowded? Our minds in this time have not only seen the beauty, they've also seen the fear. And part of our contemplative practice, as the great wise teachers of every spiritual tradition teaches us, is like the cloud of unknowing tells us, that we need to look over the shoulder of our fear, to see what is beyond the fear. Describe this a bit like when you're in an aeroplane and you're going through the turbulent clouds. It's not that you can get rid of the clouds, but you can actually hold through the clouds and begin to rise above them, and to realize that beyond the clouds, there is the vastness, the spaciousness of the light. Or another image, it's a bit like when you're being buffeted by waves, and then you dive down, if any of you are swimmers, beneath the wave, and you suddenly discover that beneath the wave there is that stillness before you need to come to the surface and gasp for air. Martin Laird, who's one of my great spiritual teachers, talks about being on the mountain with the clouds circling around you, and to recognize that there will always be clouds. And the clouds will come and the clouds will go. But you're not in the cloud. You're on the mountain. And when the cloud goes, you are not the cloud. You hold within you the vastness of the sky. I want you now, just for a moment, to recognize, perhaps just by naming, without turning on the video of the fear, but just recognize within your own heart some of those clouds that are swirling around you at the moment. Perhaps an anxiety about someone you love dearly. Just hold that person for a moment. Perhaps the cloud of a memory that still haunts you. Just name that cloud for a moment. Perhaps the cloud of an insecurity or an illness that makes you frightened. Just name that. Perhaps an insecurity that you live with, or a feeling of vulnerability that you find it difficult to share. Just name that. Perhaps a loneliness that you hold on to deep within you, that's hard to describe. Just name that loneliness. Perhaps an anxiety about the future and your future plans that you'd like to be able to be in control of, but you can't be. Just name that. Perhaps a grief that you carry with you, which is a sign of love and a longing. Perhaps name that grief too. Perhaps a hurt or a relationship that's gone wrong, or a sense of your own sin or someone who has sinned against you, that is like a wound that longs to be healed. Name that too. Recognize it. Do you know what I've just mentioned? I've just mentioned all the things that it means to be human, all the things that it means to be a person whose heart beats and who loves and cares and wants to cherish the world, and like all of us often gets things wrong and messes up and worries and feels frightened. There's nothing wrong with that. It's what it means to be a human being. Yet what our silence and our contemplative practice also means is that we don't have to be defined by our pain. We don't have to be defined by the wound. We don't have to be defined by the cloud. In the Christian tradition, we learn that the wounds of Christ become actually the signs of new life, the signs of resurrection. I remember meeting a homeless man here in my spirituality group, and I said to him, if he met the risen Christ, what would he say to him? And the homeless man paused for a long time, and I thought he was not going to answer or would think my question was ridiculous. And then he said, if I saw the risen Christ, I would say to him, can I bind your wounds? What a beautiful thing to think of, that we all need to bind the wounds of one another and that we all carry these wounds. And I said to the homeless man, I said, and what does Christ reply to you? And he said, Christ holds his hands like this, his wounded hands like this, and he says, you don't need to bind my wounds. I'm showing you these wounds so that you know that I am alive and I am blessing you. Our contemplative practice is helping us to move beyond the wound and to discover the blessing, the hope of a world where we recognize the goodness in one another, where we recognize the wellspring of life, the spirit which brings new life, the Om of our oneness with one another and with the created world. So in this time of lockdown, what have been the gifts? A greater stillness. Have any of you experienced that greater stillness? The song of the birds. How many of you, just lift up your hands, how many of you have heard bird song in the last year in a way that you've never heard it before? How many of you have noticed the seasons? You know, often we live in concrete, we live inside the building and we don't feel the temperature, we don't smell the change of the seasons, we don't see the colors of the world and its inner clock. How many of you have become more attentive this last year to the seasons that we live for? Hold up your hand. How many of you have become aware in this time, this contemplative time, of the importance of friendship? Like valued, maybe not everybody, but valued one or two friends in a way that you've never valued them before. Recognize, oh, I'm so grateful for Carol or Susan or Rosalind. Put up your hands if you've recognized the friendships that is deeply sustaining. How many of you have felt within you a compassion growing? You see, all the spiritual writers that I read talk that, there's no such thing as contemplation and action as two separate things. The more contemplative we become, the more still we become, the more our compassion grows, because the more we begin to notice the pain of the world. It becomes almost impossible to walk past the pain without recognizing it, without seeing it. And that doesn't mean that we have to solve it. We're not colonial superpowers who just go around the world solving problems. We have to see it, recognize it, hear it. Recognize that it's not just a category out there, that the pain of the world is also our pain. That if someone is suffering in Syria or Ethiopia, or if someone is suffering on a boat trying to reach a place of safety, that is human suffering, that is our suffering too. I wonder how many of you, and I'm not going to ask you to hold up your hands this time, but I'm just going to ask you, I wonder how many of you in this last 9 months have recognized compassion growing within you. The sense that you are, this is not always easy, but that you are experiencing in your own heart some of the pain of the world. I wonder too, if in this last 9 months, that this stripping down, you've also recognized that sometimes a greater simplicity is not a deprivation or is not a scarcity, but can become a greater abundance, a greater sense of richness. That as we let go of things, as we open up, we begin to discover not a poverty, but a greater wealth. That less is in fact much, much more. And there are certain things that are so precious, but they need space to grow and to live and to be. I said on my walk last Saturday, if any of you were watching, I said, you get to the age where you think, actually, I don't need any more material possessions. I've got the clothes I need. I've got the things I need. What I need to do is to treasure God, to treasure my friends, to treasure the things I love, to treasure creation. I don't want more. I want to honor what has already been given as gift. And I wonder how many of you have noticed that perhaps one of our greatest poverties in the modern world is a poverty of time. In other words, the incessant Western way of thinking that we have to be busy all the time. And that if we're not busy, if we're not doing, that somehow we're failing. Could it not be that the time of silence has come? The time of the contemplative is actually the greatest message for the world, as people like Elizabeth and Jill have realized for a long time, and thus organized days like Just This Day. That actually the binary way of living and arguing and hating and trying to survive and compete and push someone else down that we have seen so much in American politics and in our own politics is actually not satisfying the soul. I wonder if this falling, as Meister Eckhart has said, can actually be a rising, upward gravity of love. I'm going to keep silence for a few moments now as you think about some of those things. And in this silence, we've thought about some of the clouds. I want you in this next few minutes of silence to honor the blessing in your life. To look for the grace, to name the grace, the person, the gift, the sunrise, the beauty, the wonder. And to name it. These are words that I wrote in my book, The City is My Monastery, A Contemporary Rule of Life. Hold fast by letting go. The less longing, the more presence. The less we bang on the door, the more the door opens for us. The less we demand, the more the beauty of the gift. The less we expect, the more joy we discover and the more surprise. The more selfless, the more self. Clamorous need shuts us off from what is needed. It is our clinging which is our death. The less we cling, the more we embrace with love. The less we fear, the more we love. All joy reminds us it's not a possession, but it leads us onwards. Our love is a thing to come. Go lightly, go simply, go gently. Go with the beauty of balance. A breathing out, a breathing in, a shared breath, the breath of the whole world, a letting go so that we may be held in love forever. Amen. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, all of you, for listening so patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I'm about to hand over to Liz, but what a rich morning. I'm almost speechless with the richness between 9:15 and 11:45. And the words that came to mind as Richard was speaking, and the time for thanks, was this is almost like a celebration of what is, of the silence and the presence that is. And I'm going to edge my thank you in two quotations. And the first one is from the first verse, I'm not sure it's exactly the first verse of the Upanishad. And that is, whatever lives is full of the Lord. Claim nothing. Enjoy, do not covet the Lord's property. And in a sense, I feel we've been given to share such magnificent material and ways of coming to stillness. And I also heard recently was at its deepest level, silence becomes service. So I'd like to thank Liz for not repressing that irrepressible desire she has for people to be silent just this day. So thank you, Liz, for keeping this going. I would like to thank Leslie for opening our eyes and our hearts through Visio Divina. I would like to thank Rajesh, and I've seen Mary's there because Mary was singing as well. I'd like to thank you so much for that. Such an exposition on the Mundakya and your wonderful voice. I'd like to thank Richard for bringing us to our humanity. And I'd like to thank everybody here for being present, for without everybody being here, this could never have happened. This could never have been received in this way. This could never have manifested in the particular way it has today. And in our practice, our prayer practice, when we become present to giving our attention, it's not just for us, and this is why that first quotation is so important. It's not just for us, it's for the whole of creation. We're allowing that to flow through the whole of us, for the whole of creation, past, present, and to come. And so I'd like to just, before I hand over to Liz, is the second quotation comes from Psalm 104, and that is, O Lord, how manifold are thy works, in wisdom thou hast made them, the earth is full of thy riches. And so I'd like to just pause for a moment without moving, really recollecting ourselves, our whole selves. Becoming aware of each other, of those who are present here, all, how many of us? 204 of us. And allowing what we have received to flow through us and outward, beyond anything we know or can imagine. So I thank you. And for this year, I shall now pass you on to Liz.
Well, that was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I couldn't have enjoyed the morning more. And it couldn't have been more profound. And it did make me think about that. I've heard it said that if people could hold hands across the world, it would change society's way of thinking. And of course, if we were all in St. Martin in the Fields, it would be quite tricky because some people would have had to fly in from Australia and New Zealand and South Africa. But as it is, we've been able to metaphorically and actually really hold hands. So thank you for a wonderful morning. it's extraordinary really how the program has come together, because with lockdown, I think we thought nothing would really be possible. And then when we kicked it off, we had such wonderful responses from people, marvelous speakers, and they all sort of string together like beads on a necklace, strung on a thread of consciousness. And our next speaker, interestingly, in the idea of synchronicity, worked at St. Martin in the Fields some time ago, knows it well, is well known to Richard, well known to many of us. Claire Foster Gilbert. Now she's going to introduce herself actually, and I'm just going to be so pleased to see her. So I'm going to ring a bell, Claire, and then after that bell, maybe it may be worthwhile taking the 5 minutes until midday just to stretch. But at midday, Claire will be with us. So here's a bell to bring this first part to an end.